Alice Parker, a seasoned flight attendant, prides herself on her professionalism and ability to handle situations. However, on Flight 512 from New York to Paris, a moment left her facing deep prejudices that she had never realized. Sophie Carter stood at the door of the first-class cabin, her cold eyes watching each passenger walk by. When it was Turner's turn, she immediately felt an inexplicable discomfort. Ethan Turner, dressed in an elegant suit, stepped forward with a confident look, flanked by his wife, Grace, in an elegant long dress. The two children, obedient and silent, follow their parents. Although everything in their family exudes sophistication, Sophie can't help but think judgmentally. What are they doing here? The feeling of insecurity from unconscious prejudice quickly turns into a concrete decision. She smiled professionally but lacked sincerity. Sorry, I need to check my family's ticket again. Her voice was polite, but her eyes were suspicious. Ethan Turner frowned slightly. His eyes were sharp, but his voice was still calm. Is there a problem with our tickets? Sophie smiled wryly. Nothing serious. It's just that the system occasionally crashes when scanning tickets. As Ethan and Grace looked at each other, they quickly realized something was wrong but decided to keep quiet. Ethan replied softly, I believe you will solve this problem, but we hope to be treated fairly. Ethan's words made Sophie pause for a moment. A feeling of discomfort and anxiety rekindled in her, but Sophie tried to hide it. After a few minutes of checking the tickets without finding any problems, she reluctantly returned the tickets to them. As the Turners entered the first-class cabin, Sophie turned to her colleague, Emma Davis, and lowered her voice. Emma, you don't see that family. Is something wrong? Emma frowned. Isn't that right? They are polite, tickets are valid. What do you mean? Sophie hesitated. I don't know, it's just, there is a feeling that they don't belong here. Emma looked at Sophie, a glimpse of disappointment in her eyes. Sophie, they bought a first-class ticket. He didn't think that his feelings were somewhat prejudice? Emma's words were like a slap to Sophie's wake, but instead of admitting, Sophie responded with a wry smile. However, the dissatisfaction in her heart has not disappeared. During the flight, Sophie deliberately avoided the Turner family. When they pressed the call button to ask for a drink, she delayed the service, prioritizing the other passengers first. When she brought the food, Sophie did not hide her lack of enthusiasm, and her voice was cold. This is a family meal. Grace smiled politely. Thank you, but I think there is confusion. We ordered vegetarian meals. Sophie frowned, showing annoyance. I'll check again, but I'm pretty sure this is the correct order. Without bothering to go back to check, Sophie walked away. The Turner family, though aware of the injustice, remained calm. Ethan looked at Grace and said softly, It's okay, we'll try to ignore it. However, Sophie's actions did not go unnoticed by the other passengers. An older woman sitting nearby glanced at Sophie with uncomfortable eyes, while a couple sitting nearby whispered to each other. The air in the cabin gradually became heavy, but Sophie still refused to face the eyes around her, convincing herself that her feelings were right. Sophie Carter never thought of herself as a biased person. In her mind, she always adheres to the principles of professional service, ensuring that all passengers are treated fairly. But sometimes, hidden thoughts in her subconscious creep in and guide her actions without even realizing it. As Sophie walked through the Turner row, her gaze paused for a little longer. Ethan Turner, with his tall appearance and sharp eyes, leaned over to say something to his wife, Grace Turner. The two children sat neatly next to each other, each attentive with the book in their hands. Their family looked completely normal, but deep down, Sophie still couldn't escape the thought. They weren't like the first-class passengers I usually served. That thought was not clear, but powerful enough to govern her behavior. When the drinks arrived, Sophie glanced past the Turners without stopping. When Grace gently pressed the button to call the hostess, Sophie came back with a wry smile, her voice a little cold. What does the family need? Grace smiled, still maintaining a polite attitude. We ordered orange juice, but there seemed to be a mistake. This is apple juice. Sophie looked at the glass of water on the table, then turned to look at Grace with a somewhat reserved look. "Let me check. But usually the order is not wrong." As she turned away, Sophie heard Grace whisper to her husband, "Maybe she's busy." Ethan was just silent, but his gaze swept over Sophie, as if he could read the psychology behind her attitude. During the flight, Sophie couldn't shake off the vague discomfort of having to serve the Turner family. She justifies herself. "It's not that I don't like them, but why do they make me feel uncomfortable?" This question, which had no answer, made Sophie even more confused. When she brought the meal, Sophie realized that a dish was not what she requested. But instead of taking the initiative to deal with it, she just put it down on the table in a nonchalant tone. "Here's the family's meal." Grace looked at the food in front of her, and then said softly, "Sorry, but we ordered a vegetarian meal." Sophie looked up, her expression clearly showing dissatisfaction. "I'll watch it again, but I think this is the part that has been set." She turned away without waiting for an answer. At that moment, a colleague of Sophie's, Emma Davis, approached and asked quietly, "What's wrong, Sophie? You look a little nervous." Sophie just shook her head, her voice a little annoyed. "Nothing. I just thought someone was excessively demanding." Emma frowned and looked in the direction Sophie was suggesting. Looking at the Turner family sitting calmly, she asked again, "Do you really think they're troublesome? I find them very polite." Sophie didn't answer, but Emma's words made her momentarily embarrassed. She herself knew that the discomfort did not come from the behavior of the Turner family but from an invisible prejudice. But instead of facing it, Sophie chose to ignore that feeling, letting it creep into her every gesture and word. In the first-class cabin, eyes began to turn towards Sophie. An older passenger, sitting not far from the Turner family, shook his head slowly. A young couple whispered to each other, their eyes unable to hide their discomfort. Sophie felt it all but said to herself, "I didn't do anything wrong. If they are dissatisfied, it is their problem, not mine." But that excuse could not hide the truth. The persistent prejudice in her mind was gradually turning into a barrier that prevented her from seeing the Turner family objectively. And though she didn't admit it, Sophie knew deep down, she was letting that feeling guide her, little by little. The shrill beep of the alarm system sounded, shaking the quiet space of the cabin. Sophie Carter stopped in the middle of the aisle, the tray of drinks in her hand shaking violently. Her gaze immediately turned towards the notification screen. The red warning light flashed continuously, and a message from the cockpit sounded. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical problems. Please stay calm and follow the instructions of the flight attendant." A stream of cold air ran down Sophie's spine. She clearly felt that her heart was beating so fast that it was difficult to breathe. In her mind, a series of bad prospects rushed over, but her professional instinct immediately pulled her back to reality. "I am a flight attendant. I have to stay calm." Sophie took a deep breath, trying to adjust her breathing. Her hand squeezed the drink tray so tightly that her knuckles were white. She put the tray down on an empty chair nearby and looked around the compartment. Passengers began to whisper. Worried and frightened eyes gradually appeared. "Stewardess, what's going on?" A middle-aged man stood up, his voice panicked. Sophie approached, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sir, the plane has some technical problems, but the crew is dealing with it. Please sit down and fasten your seatbelt." The man looked at her, his eyes full of doubt. But Sophie didn't give him a chance to argue, and she gently but firmly guided him back to his chair. Behind him, a child began to cry. Sophie turned around and saw a little girl about 7 years old, hugging her mother tightly. Her watery eyes made Sophie's heart tighten. She knelt down beside her. "Hello. It's okay, we'll be fine." Although she tried to smile, Sophie knew that smile was not convincing enough. But her mother, though also nervous, still squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes full of gratitude for Sophie. The sound of the engine suddenly changed, and a strange sound like the sound of metal friction sounded. Sophie felt the ground under her feet shake slightly. A new wave of fear spread throughout the chamber. Some passengers began to scream, stood up, and jostled into the aisle. "Everyone, please sit down." Sophie was loud, her voice full of authority that she herself did not expect to have. "Fasten your seatbelt now." Sophie rushed towards the end of the compartment, pressed the call button for a colleague. Emma Davis, her best friend in the crew, appears. Emma looked at her, her eyes full of tension. "Do you see anything? Did the cockpit say anything more?" Sophie asked quickly. "They're trying to fix. But it seems that there is a problem with the cabin pressure system," Emma replied, her voice trembling. Sophie nodded, trying to suppress the feeling of panic. She returned to the passenger compartment, where all eyes were fixed on her, as if clinging to a little security from the image of the flight attendant. Sophie understands her role. Even though she was screaming inside, she had to stay calm, because she was the only bridge between the passengers and the other fragile sense of security. Walking slowly down the aisle, Sophie checked each chair, bent down to adjust an old man's seatbelt, reassured a trembling mother, and even helped a young businessman put away a suitcase that had fallen out of the luggage compartment. Those small actions helped her temporarily forget the fear in her heart. When she returned to the end of the cabin, Sophie felt a little tired. But her eyes met the Turner family, all four of them sitting upright, holding hands. Grace Turner looked at her, nodded slightly, as if to say, "You did a good job." At that moment, Sophie felt that she was not alone. She took another deep breath, then turned back to the passenger, determined to keep everything under control. There was silence as Amelia stood in the middle of the room, newspaper in hand. The words on it seemed to challenge everything she had believed in for so long. She could clearly feel the heaviness of the air, as if every breath in the room was waiting for something to happen. She swallowed dryly, her heart pounding in her chest. Although she was mentally prepared, when the truth was finally exposed, it still made her stunned. The newspaper in her hand was like a curtain that overturned everything, making it impossible for her to look directly at herself in the mirror. The light from the table lamp shone on the newspaper, highlighting the sharp, cruel words. Amelia Grayson, the daughter of the head of the Grayson Group, was found in an international scam. These words flashed through her eyes like slaps, word by word deeply hurting her self-esteem. Amelia couldn't think right away. Her mind was spinning. Impossible. Can't be me. She shook her head slightly, her trembling hands holding the newspaper tightly, but she couldn't seem to find any justification. She couldn't accept this fact, but she saw it with her own eyes. She felt as if her mind was paralyzed. Every fragment of the memory of the past was now coming back. The conversations, the events that she seemed to have forgotten, now appeared in a new light, a different perspective on things. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She walked out of the room, each step echoing in the empty corridor. She needs to face what awaits. The rumors out there will not stop just because she is evading. Opening the door of the office, she immediately met the worried eyes of her colleagues. Some people have heard the sound, some people already know about it. They were waiting for a reaction from her, but when her eyes met with them, no one dared to say anything. Amelia looked through the window, where white clouds flashed through the air. The sky, nothing has changed. She is still Amelia, still the woman who stands on the bridge between her family and the company. But today, the truth has torn apart everything she has built. She couldn't keep wearing that resilient mask. I no longer have the strength to continue pretending. Her gaze stared intently at each of her colleagues, and then slowly opened her mouth. The truth has come. I can't change anything, but I can still choose how to face it. She didn't want to show weakness, but the trembling in her voice couldn't be hidden. What are you supposed to do? Can she save her career? Things were slowly slipping out of her grasp, and now she could only hope for something better in the future. The door to the office closed behind her, and Amelia stood there for a moment, leaning against her desk, feeling like the whole world was collapsing. But inside her, there was a glimmer of hope that was still flickering. As long as I get up, I can still do it again. Amelia stood in front of the mirror, the dim light of the bathroom reflecting a strange image. She stared at herself, her eyes tired and lifeless, but she still couldn't take her eyes off. She wanted to look for some sign, something familiar, to be able to confirm that she was still the person she had known. She closed her eyes, and a wave of thought rushed back. like waves sweeping the shore. Wrong decisions, thoughtless words, and even compromises with oneself for safety. It was all now like a broken mirror. The fragments could not be put together. She suddenly remembered the days before the truth was exposed. While she still believes that she can hold on to everything, she still thinks that the ability to hide mistakes and save face is the most important thing. But now it has all been exposed. She couldn't run away from herself anymore. Amelia sighed, her hand resting on the side of the sink, trying to stand firm. The pain in her heart was like an underground wave, invisible but made her lose all her strength. She used to think she could control everything, but now, the truth makes everything meaningless. In that moment, Amelia realized something important. She couldn't continue to live in the cover she had created. She can't forever hide her mistakes. She can't forever stand behind the mask of a perfect person. She couldn't turn a blind eye to her weaknesses, her fears, and the things she had always avoided. But even when she realized it, she didn't know where to start. She wasn't ready to change completely, but at least she could face herself. She can see pain, loss, and feelings of failure, and she must learn to live with them. Amelia left the mirror and walked slowly out of the bathroom. It felt uneven, as if she had just stepped out of a long and painful dream. She couldn't change the past, but she could change her future, at least a small step from today. Amelia sat quietly on the sofa in the quiet room, the dim light from outside the window shining on her face, making everything around her seem to sink into darkness. The feeling of stress and anxiety still lingers, like an underground wave that has not yet subsided. But for the first time in years, she didn't try to hide from that feeling. Instead of ignoring it, she allowed herself to feel each emotion completely, no matter how painful it was. She recalled the meeting with the Lewis family, the words and eyes full of disappointment. Feelings of shame surged, mixed between regret and anger with themselves. She could no longer deny the truth. Her actions, her unconscious prejudices had hurt people she didn't deserve to be treated like that. Amelia placed her hand on her chest, feeling the strong beating of her heart. At this time, she no longer felt that it was the pain of failure. That is the pain of awakening. She was able to admit that she was wrong, that she needed to change. This is the time, she said to herself, her voice firm but also serious. If I don't change, I'll forever be trapped in this same cover. I can't let myself continue to live in lies and self-justification. She got up and walked towards the desk where the documents and books were still piled up. The work was not finished. Part of her felt confused, not knowing where to start. But another part was full of determination. Instead of continuing to let guilt sink into her, she began to look for ways to change. She opened her computer, looking for courses on awareness and overcoming prejudice, ways she could cleanse her soul. Seminars on tolerance, justice, and social inclusion appeared before her eyes like a light shining through a cloud. Amelia felt that the road ahead would not be easy, but at least she had a clear goal. Change won't come right away, she thought, as her hand ran over the keyboard. But at least I won't stand still. She sends an email to Liam, who has always been the person she goes to when she feels disoriented. Brother, I've already decided. I'm going to change. I can't let myself continue to avoid wrong things anymore. Liam replied immediately, I'll do it, Amelia. I believe you. That encouragement seemed to empower her. Amelia looked at the computer screen, her heart full of determination. She knows she can't change the past, but she can embrace the present, committing herself that every day will be a step towards a better person. With perseverance, she closed the computer and walked out of the room. Each step now feels more stable, as if she has embarked on a journey not only to change, but to find her true self again. She no longer hides from pain, but is willing to face and learn from her mistakes. Amelia walked into the office with a strange feeling, different from the previous days. Her heart pounded, not because of fear or insecurity, but because of a new feeling, as if she had decided to abandon her old way of doing things, to take a completely different direction. She clearly felt the tension, but there was also a part of the excitement. She knows that this is the time for her to prove that change is not just a promise, but a practical action. She stopped in front of her desk, where stacks of unfinished documents were still piled up. The whole space around her was still the same as ever, but to Amelia, it was all like a faint old picture, which she no longer wanted to see. She took a deep breath, then sat down, turned on the computer, and began to rearrange everything. Regular meetings during the week, superficial and incomprehensible exchanges of information, were no longer relevant to her. She did not want to continue to maintain the same apathy and irresponsibility as before. The feeling of awakening she has experienced over the past few days has opened up a new path. She not only wants to change the way she sees work, but also wants to change herself in the way she works. Amelia decided to start with a clearer plan for each project, instead of following the old habit of letting things run in a vague way. She is looking for new ways to manage her time and work, from using organizational tools to assigning tasks in a more streamlined way. She recalled the management courses she had taken before. Now they were not just distant theories but became practical tools that helped her reorganize her work. When there was a meeting with her team, Amelia prepared very well. She doesn't want to let her lack of organization and impatience continue to affect her work results. She actively leads the meeting, encouraging each person to share ideas and suggestions, instead of just sitting quietly and listening as before. She understands that work cannot rely only on top-down direction, but requires cooperation and consensus from everyone. The eyes of her colleagues looked at her with a little surprise, but also showed respect when she was more proactive and led the discussion. After the meeting, Amelia was relieved, although there were things that needed to be improved, but at least she had made a solid step. She realized that nothing had changed immediately, but she had mastered her work instead of being controlled by it. She no longer let feelings of failure or dissatisfaction dominate. Over the next few days, Amelia gradually felt the change not only from the outside, but also from within herself. Every morning when she arrives at the office, she no longer feels like a person who works just to get the job done. She feels like she's doing her job with a clear goal, with new responsibilities and passion. Despite the challenges and difficulties ahead, Amelia knows that she is ready to face it and continues to strive to change not only in her work, but also in her own way of life. Amelia sat quietly in the cafe. The coffee cup holder had cooled, but her mind could not rest. Over the past few weeks, she has been thinking a lot about her relationship with her colleagues, especially with Adam. Since she began to change her approach to work, she noticed that the coldness between them was getting bigger and bigger. They no longer communicate as before, the conversations are no longer fluid and natural, but instead there is a tense silence. She knew that part of it was her fault. Amelia used to be too focused on work, ignoring the emotions and communication needs of those around her. Work stories have made her rigid and disinterested in the little things in the relationship. But now, she realizes that without rebuilding this relationship, she will never be able to accomplish the long-term goals she has set. Amelia decided to take the initiative. She sent Adam a simple message. "Can we meet today? I want to talk." Although these words seemed to be gentle, in her heart, a feeling of anxiety rose strongly. She didn't know how Adam would react, whether he would be willing to open up and listen to her. When Adam agreed to meet, her heart beat faster. She walked into the cafe, her eyes looking for him. Adam was already there, looking at her with calm eyes, not looking annoyed or angry, but not as friendly as before. Amelia sat down across from him, starting the conversation with gentle words. "I know I haven't paid attention to you in the past time, and my work has made me forget what is important. I'm sorry about that." Adam was silent for a moment, then slowly replied, "I understand, but it's not just the job, it's the way you drift apart. In meetings and conversations, I feel like I'm no longer part of your decisions." His words were like a knife, but instead of defending, Amelia listened with a completely different attitude. She understood that she needed to change not only in her work, but in the way she maintained her relationships. "You're right," Amelia replied, her voice soft but determined. "I was too focused on my work and didn't pay attention to your feelings. I will do everything to change this." She looked directly into Adam's eyes, seeing the hurt in it, but also a glimmer of hope. She knew that this was the only chance they could rebuild their relationship, and she couldn't afford to miss it. Amelia was determined not to let this conversation become a breakdown, but a new beginning. After that meeting, she began to find ways to reconnect with Adam, not only at work, but also in everyday life. She actively invites him to participate in after-hours conversations, texting to ask him about things that are not related to work. Every action, no matter how small, is a way for her to prove that she is ready to open up and rebuild her trust. Gradually, Adam began to share more. Conversations are no longer stressful, but instead of mutual understanding, sympathy, and sharing. Amelia sensed that their relationship had gradually healed, and although it was not possible to immediately return to the way it was before, at least they had begun to walk a new path, with cautious and consistent steps. Amelia understands that rebuilding relationships is a long process and requires a lot of patience, but she is willing. She realized that only when she really cares about other people's feelings and thoughts can relationships really develop. Amelia stood in front of the new group of employees, in the light of the large conference room. This was the first time she had to face a group of people she didn't know, a group she hoped could inspire them in work and life. A sense of nervousness enveloped her, but it was no longer the same fear as before. Instead, it's a new feeling of confidence. She knows that she herself has changed a lot over the years, and now, the lessons she has learned will be a valuable asset to share with them. She looked into the eyes of each person in the group, not only to create a connection but also to feel them, to see if those eyes had any expectations or not. Amelia took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice full of energy and sincerity. Hi guys, I know that each of you is at a different point in your career journey, and I've been like you, doubting myself, feeling tired, and even wanting to give up sometimes. But over time, I realized that it is the challenges and difficulties that are the most valuable lessons that help us grow. Amelia didn't say these words to brag or to be arrogant. She said it was because she understood the feeling of frustration, the feeling of being caught in difficulties, but at the same time she also knew that change was possible. Her words carried a powerful message. If I can change, so can you. Everyone can push their limits, as long as they don't give up. When it comes to her failures, Amelia doesn't shy away. She shares about the times she was criticized, about her failures at work, and the loneliness she experienced. But instead of using those experiences to weaken her faith, she chose to share them as stories of perseverance. Failure is not the end point, she continued, but the opportunity to start over, but this time from valuable experiences. The people in the group began to listen, their eyes no longer vague, but instead interested. They could feel the sincerity in Amelia's every word. Not only does she impart knowledge of the job, but she also inspires the power of perseverance and belief in each person's ability to change. The feeling of confidence in Amelia's heart grew more and more. Not only is she standing there explaining her work, but she is sharing a part of herself and her true thoughts and feelings. She knew that, in order to be a leader that people could trust and follow, she needed to be a role model that they could look up to and feel motivated about. At the end of the sharing session, Amelia felt a slight change in the air. The eyes of her colleagues lit up, not because she was a good presenter, but because they felt that they were no longer alone in their journey. Some people approached her, asking more about the decisions she had made in the past, the difficulties she had overcome. Amelia smiled, feeling full of energy. She knew that today not only was she inspired, but the people around her had also found the motivation to move on. From her own stories, she has proven that change is not impossible, but something worth aiming for. And that's how she inspires her, not with far-fetched theories, but with her own actions and perseverance. Amelia stood at the window of her office, looking out into the city with a thoughtful gaze. The scenery outside was gradually sinking into the night. The lights of the buildings reflected the thoughts in her head. After everything she had been through, she felt a marked change in herself. But despite overcoming many challenges, she knows that her journey is never over. This feeling, although somewhat tired, was full of determination. Over the years, she has learned to face herself, admit her weaknesses, and constantly strive to improve. She has changed, has become more mature in work and life. But that change is not a destination, but a continuous journey. Every day she learns new things, realizes the aspects that she needs to develop more. She smiled softly, realizing that there were no stops, and that was what made the journey so enjoyable and worthwhile. The light from the desk lamp shone on the plan she was writing. The next goals, the new challenges. They were still there, but this time, she didn't feel as nervous or pressured as before. Amelia understands that this process is never stopping. Whether she succeeds or fails, every step is an important part of her development. She picked up the pen and outlined her goals for the next month. A gentle smile appeared on her lips as she thought about what she could achieve. The journey is not over, and she no longer wants to stop. Feeling depressed or afraid every day has now given way to a steadfastness. Amelia knows that not everything is always easy, but it is those difficulties that will help her rise stronger. No matter how long the journey is, she will always keep going. She got up, went to the window, and looked out again. A deep breath helped her feel peace in her heart. She understands that every day is a new opportunity. Every difficulty is a challenge that she will overcome. The journey is not over, she whispered to herself, and this time, she was ready to continue.